All right. Good morning, Alan.
Good morning, Kobe.
It's nice to get to do this. We have gathered some questions from the fine people of the Madcrew forum, the place that you set up and that I would like to talk about. Today, we have a number of questions, about 15 of them. Some are training related, some are general AMA, ask me anything questions, and we'll go over them today. For the listener or the viewer, there are timestamps where you can easily skip between questions, so that you don't have to listen to the whole thing if you don't want to. But Alan, let me start by asking you a general question. Could you give us a short introduction, a short bio of who you are for people who are not, who haven't come across your work yet?
Sure. So I am, I guess, first and foremost, a coach and physiologist. I've been doing that pretty much for the entirety of my adult life. I grew up as a swimmer, so I was a competitive swimmer from the ages of 12 to 19, 20-ish sort of thing. And after getting out of that, I guess I had a period where I sort of wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. So a natural progression was to stay in sports and study sports science at university. So I did that. I got my master's in exercise phys. And as a part of that, I was fortunate to get a practicum at the Australian Institute of Sport. So I was working with the Australian swim team at the Institute of Sport and the physiologist there, and all of the sort of entirety of the team around the Olympians, and that really kind of, I think, set the path for what I would do for the rest of my life. In terms of really looking to work with high performance athletes and looking to push the boundaries there of what we can do from a physiological perspective. So I initially was working with swimmers in that capacity, and just through various sort of strokes of luck, I guess I ended up moving a little bit more into triathlon and working with some elite level competitors in triathlon as well, and moved to the States and continued doing that. And I've been pretty much doing that for the past I guess 15 years, focusing on triathlon. So that brings us to now, I guess.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you did recently was set up the Madcrew forum. You have been, or you are quite active on Twitter or X. That's where I came across your work for the first time. But you have created this place where I guess the conversation is a bit more straightforward than on Twitter or X. Could you share some thoughts on Madcrew? It's been live for a couple of weeks now. What was the reasoning behind it, and what kind of place are you trying to create there?
Yeah, I think, I joined Twitter in, I don't know, I think it was like 2009 or something, and initially it was really cool. It was a place where, you would kind of connect with these physiologists that you'd sort of read papers from, in the past, and you'd be able to have conversations with these people, and you connect with athletes that you ordinarily might not have come across in your everyday life, and you're able to sort of communicate and have conversations and learn things. And then over time, I think the conversation started to get more one-sided. It was just kind of, people would just throw stuff out there, and there wasn't a whole lot of dialogue around it, and eventually I think it started to shift to more people as influencers who wanted to sort of just communicate their position rather than a community, which is sort of what it felt like in the beginning, and once I started to head down that path, I felt for myself, I wasn't feeling as satisfied. You know, I wasn't feeling like it was the sort of place that I signed up for initially. And that got me thinking to way back when, before Twitter time. One of my good friends, Gordo Byrne, when he was an athlete, he had set up his own member forum, you know, to just kind of share with people as he was training and they were training. And, you know, it was this nice kind of community of folks who were all on a similar path and learning from each other. And that really kind of stayed with me, I think, you know. And I thought, man, it would be really cool if we just kind of got away from all of the current social media trend of people just sort of shouting at each other, you know, and algorithms picking what we see and all of that, and just got back to a community of folks who are all doing a similar sort of thing and just want to learn from each other. So that was really what sort of prompted me to set it up. And, you know, once I did, it's been fantastic. I sort of think I wish I had set it up 10 years ago, you know, and how big the community would be now if we had have done that. So I'm excited for the future of it.
It's a bit heavy on the INTJs, if I recall it.
That was surprising. Yeah, I mean, I would be very happy to get a little bit more diversity, I guess, in terms of personality types there. But yeah, it seems like maybe 90% or so are INTJ. Yeah, that was a little off.
What was the idea? Was it what kind of people were you trying to attract? And I am, for people who aren't familiar with the forum or who haven't checked it out yet. So one of the most viewed and replied to topics, or one of the most viewed ones, are the share your training. So there's a daily topic where people share stuff. But also it goes quite into the weeds with the one of the popular ones is the exercise physiology paper watch. Like there's all kinds of general comments. There's all kinds of specific questions about power meters. There's of course you have made already quite a couple of posts that would have been long form Twitter threads or posts. What is the kind of like typical person that you try to reach or try to get onto the forum, or typical kind of content that you like to see there?
Yeah, I'm really hoping that it's pretty diverse. You know, I think initially when I started on Twitter, the majority of people who followed me and who I followed were sort of high performance athletes or coaches that worked with high performance athletes. And over time, that sort of changed a little bit. And I think a lot of the stuff that I was posting really resonated with more sort of health and fitness people, you know, and folks who maybe had reached a point in their life where they're looking to turn things around and make some inroads in terms of their general health and fitness. So, you know, I'm hopeful that we can get a really diverse group there that you know, address both of those things. And you know, I think even for the high performance athletes, health is so important, you know. So I think they're often seen as sort of these two binary groups where you got the super serious high performance guys who really just do everything to maximize their performance and, you know, don't care so much about all of the general health stuff. But in my experience, at least, you know, health is absolutely integral to keeping the training rolling and being able to reach those super high levels of performance. So you know, I think we can all learn from each other in both of those aspects.
One of the questions asked, I'll kick off the list. You trained a lot all throughout your life, and some of it at very demanding intensities. Did you ever approach a physical or mental burnout? And if so, did you get out of it? How did you get out of it?
Yeah, I think pretty much that whole period from 12 to 20, maybe 13 to 20 was very, very, very close to that mental and physical burnout. You know, I grew up in a time when intensity was really the name of the game when it came to swim training. So, you know, you would pretty much be training at or above threshold on most of the sessions of the week. There would be a big chunk of training devoted to really hard efforts. And unfortunately, being a little bit of a late starter, I was sort of at the back of the group. So we're training hard, and I'm trying to keep up with people that maybe I shouldn't have been keeping up with as well. So with those two things combined, I felt like I was going very, very hard and doing things very tough for a number of years. And really it sort of manifested as things would go well for a period of a few months, and then I'd just completely fall apart and have this period of inconsistency where my body had initially rebel, and then I'd kind of work my way back and get back into it. But it was just continually up and down. There was no kind of long-term progress, So I think the only way that I got out of that really was when I went to the Institute of Sport and I saw the difference between how the best in the world were training versus how I was training. And, it was really eye-opening to see just how much easy training the top swimmers were doing. At that point, I would consider myself a fairly serious competitive swimmer. I'd been doing it for almost a decade. And I just realized that we were doing it all wrong. We really, my coach really didn't have that perspective of what the top swimmers were doing and what it took to reach those next levels.
Why is there such a big gap between the approach on the elite or the top level and let's say the I don't want to say the average level, or why is there such a big gap on approach gap between these kind of coaches on these different levels? Like what would explain that?
Yeah, I think education comes into play quite a bit. Like, I don't know how it is now, but at the time we had these levels of coaches in Australia, and level one was kind of just a weekend course plus a little bit of a practicum with a coach who'd done okay, and then level two was a little bit above that. I think you went to a few different sort of seminars, and you had some practical experience with a coach of the next level up. But yeah, overall, I don't think that the average coaches at a lot of the programs were getting the sort of education that the top coaches were getting. And there's a lot of tradition still in the sport too. Where a coach will grow up as a swimmer themselves, and they'll have their own perspective of how they were coached. And they carry a lot of that across to how they coach as well, especially when they don't have that experience that I had of being exposed to, okay, this is how the best in the world are training, and if I hadn't have had that, I'm sure I still would have thought that the way that I was taught was the right way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, I think this comes up on the forum as well, that people are a bit confused with their Garmin watches. They still get a worse score because it's based on it's mostly based on anaerobic activity and not as much on zone 1, zone 2 base building. And so you get these weird insights that you're not as fit as you should be, but you're base building. And it still tilts quite heavily towards anaerobic activity, high heart rate activity. So it's still in a way very, very consequential.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think a lot of those algorithms and stuff, you got to remember they're being programmed in, so someone in their head has a particular percentage in mind of how much of the training should be hard versus easy, and whether that's valid or not, is another story.
This actually ties into another question that was asked on the forum. How do we get the running interested crowd to slow it down enough? People want to run, and when you tell them not to run, the exciting prospect of running goes out of the window. So how do we actually tell people, not only runners, but how do we tell people to slow down?
Yeah, I think America especially, but probably a good chunk of the world still have this sort of no pain, no gain belief, and it's a very very deep sort of visceral belief that if you go out and you do a training session and it feels easy and it doesn't hurt, then it's not doing anything, and that's still I think a tape that plays in the heads of a lot of people when they go out and do their training, that they measure the effectiveness of a session not by how much they improve long term, but by how much that session hurt them right then and there. So I think that's still a big problem. Is just that we need to educate people that that there is benefit to those easy intensities, and even if they can't feel it at the time, that there are good things that are happening progressively over time, that these changes in the system that ultimately lead to the performance levels that they're looking for. I think education of what the best athletes are doing and exposure to that really helps. Just like my own experience with the swimmers, if I didn't have that, I'm sure that I would still be of the no pain, no gain mentality. I think we're getting more exposure with that now, with people sharing things. There was that the Christian Blumenfeld paper that just came out that sort of gave a little bit of insight on his training and just how much high volume, low intensity work there is. And I've done some analysis of his Strava files and stuff as well, and it's really quite amazing just how much low intensity, less than 50% of threshold work he's doing in his training, and that certainly gels with what I saw with the swimmers as well. So I think education certainly helps, but on some level, it's that old quote from Fran Stanfield that training is principally an act of faith. So at a certain point, you just have to say, I'm going to give this a shot. Like, I'm going to give this a year of low intensity work, and I'm going to stick to it. I'm just going to see what happens, and if I don't get the improvement that everyone's saying that I'm going to get, then fair enough. But I'm going to stick to this and give it the time to work. I think when athletes reach that point and they do that, it's very rare for an athlete to put in that year and then say, no, that's all bunk. I'm going to go back to all hard all the time. That doesn't seem to happen. So.
Yeah, and also, obviously, I'm an amateur, not your average pro athlete, but there has been quite a bit of some publications have come out, and not only the scientific studies, but I'm thinking of the Niels van der Poel ice skating paper that he wrote there. Of course, I'm blanking on his name, the 6-time Ironman world champion that trained with Phil Maffetone.
Yeah, Mark Allen.
Mark Allen, obviously, he went on some podcasts, and at least for me as an amateur, that is how I came across mostly the idea of lowering the intensity. So it's people like Mark Allen, but also Niels van der Poel, who wrote his ice skating, how to skate 10K, I think. So compared to the time when you grew up, there is simply much more education, and it's easier to find, people are speaking up, or it's easier to share these insights. So I guess that's also just quite good. One question I was thinking about as you were explaining, in what sense does this have to do with the typical age of young performers? So, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that swimming is based more towards younger elite athletes, whereas triathlon you can get a bit older. So, could you draw a distinction between the average age of sports? Does it have to do with that? Like, do you simply need to struggle a bit before you? I guess it's harder for any 18 to 30-year-old to accept that the base building might be a superior training schedule than the long term. I don't know if that has to do with any of the training.
Yeah, I think you hit upon a really important point, and that is having space to develop that base training. And going back to my experience, we had the Institute of Sport was kind of this combination of already really top level athletes, but also these developmental up and coming athletes, who were 15, 16 years old and had been identified as showing potential. and we're going through the process of developing, and the government was giving them money to do that. They were able to sort of live as full-time athletes, and as they were laying these important base training years. So I think that is a big factor. And when we look at some of the success of some of the countries of late, Norway comes to mind as a very sort of similar situation where the government is subsidizing athletes to aid in their development to reach top levels. So they obviously have this space, and maybe some other countries who don't have that same setup, you get athletes who are maybe coming out of single sport and then going into triathlon or something, and there's a very real sense that if I really want to have a go at this, I've got to race frequently. And if I want to race frequently, I've kind of got to be in good shape all through the year. I don't have a lot of space to lay that all important base, and I think what that manifests as is some of that difference that we see between those athletes who are at the absolute top of the world and those athletes who are just on that level below that really kind of struggle to make up the gap.
Next question. I'm kind of I'm trying to tie these together because we naturally get into these different topics. Somebody asked if there is a distinction between training for performance, so for example a competitive age grouper, and training for health, for example somebody who's optimizing for their later years. So how does the strategy or the approach differ or does not differ between those two kinds of people?
Yeah, I mean, my take is true high performance, like elite level sort of best in the world performance. The only way for that to occur is if you're able to string together multiple years of progressive training. And to string together multiple years of progressive training, you can't be sick and injured very frequently, because those are the main things that break that progression. You can afford to have these sort of 1 week periods, maybe a couple of weeks a year where you sort of have a little bit of downtime. But if you're frequently sick or you're frequently injured and you've got these multi-week periods just scattered through the season, it gets very hard to make those year-to-year progressions that are so important to reaching high levels of performance. So I think the two are integral, absolutely. And I think for an athlete who really wants to see what they can do and reach their potential in the sport, they have to be very cognizant of their health and protecting their health at all costs. I think that's one of the kind of understated differences between those athletes who go on to really great things and those who don't. The ones who go on to really great things kind of develop this independent mindset where they're like, no, I'm not going to do this particular session today because something feels a bit iffy. And maybe some of those athletes who break more frequently are more, yep, this is on the program, I'm doing it no matter what, and eventually the body just says, well, no, you're not doing it today. And so I think that's a key factor for sure.
Would you say, and this is just perhaps an unrelated question, but through the forum, I guess that most people that get there are people who are optimizing for health. Is that by design, that you're mostly trying to reach people trying to get healthy? And I remember, I'm pretty sure you made a post that this made a distinction between fitness and health, like those are two different things.
Yeah, I think that's, again, going back to my own experience, was just doing the wrong side of that, and just being obsessed with trying to get fitter all the time and banging my head against the wall and getting injured and getting sick all the time. And, that really left a mark. So I think now I just emphasize the importance of health so much. And, irrespective of whether there are people who have big goals as far as reaching high levels of performance sport, or they're just people who really want to stay in top shape and stay fit and healthy through their life. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference there. I think both sides really need to be quite cognizant of things like structural health, metabolic health. Those kind of factors are pretty important, whether you're an athlete or not.
Somebody would like to ask you about injuries. Our discussion on identifying as an athlete, putting on the heart rate strap regardless, and hobbling to the bench 50 meters away when you're recovering from broken bones got me thinking. What were your lessons learned from that experience of serious injury? And perhaps you could expand a bit on the serious injury that you had. Are there more gems that could help others with reframing injuries, the recovery process, and managing expectations, if you are comfortable with discussing the subject?
Yeah, so the injury in question was 2005, I think it was, and I had a really bad bike wreck, and I ended up breaking my femur. I broke the socket essentially to my hip, and they had to put like a titanium rod down the center that I've still got in my femur, and a bunch of screws and all that good stuff. And I was in a wheelchair for like 3 months, and beyond that, when I was able to get out of the wheelchair, it was shocking just how weak that leg was, and how much strength I'd lost. Just standing and supporting my body weight was like a mammoth feat. It was like squatting 500 pounds sort of thing. That's what it felt like in terms of kind of psyching myself up to do.
What caused the accident? Was somebody else involved, or was it a fall?
No, it was just a freak accident. Like it was cold, and I was reaching behind me to pull a glove out of my back pocket, and I kind of bumped the bars on the way through. And it was just kind of one of those freak things. And I guess I just hit the ground all wrong, because my hip just basically shattered when I hit the ground. I didn't fall right, and it was, at the time, because there was so much internal bleeding and stuff, like my O2 sats dropped way down. They thought I might die at some point. It was pretty legit. Long story short, it was definitely a major injury, and it was one of those injuries where it's kind of like I may never compete again. I may never be able to sort of run again. I may not really be able to kind of ever front up to a race again, and so I think, kind of going back to that question, it was a real fork in the road point, where you ask yourself, if you could never be on a start line again, if you could never compete, would you still train? Would you still be living this athletic life? And I think that wasn't an easy question to answer when you're sort of in the midst of not being able to barely hobble to the mailbox sort of thing. But ultimately, the answer that I came up with was yes, because being functional through the entirety of my life is really important to me. So whether I can run a 10K fast, ultimately that's just a means to an end. That's not the big goal. The big goal is being functional and being able to explore and still go on hikes and stuff when I'm in my 70s and 80s, and hopefully beyond that. And I think that experience really led me to that mindset, and that's something that I carry forward now, and I try to instill even in those younger athletes, that keep it in perspective. Yes, the sport is fun when you're young and you're doing all of these things, but in the end, the thing that matters is that you're able to do this through the entirety of your life, and you don't want to make decisions that are going to compromise that. So I think I think that change in mindset was a big part of it for sure.
Mhm. How long did it take you to recover from the moment of or from the day of the accident?
I mean, I think I did a 10K maybe a year after that, and I was still not in. I probably shouldn't have been doing a 10K because I had some structural stuff still going on, and even to this day, like that hip's still not. It's not right. It's not. It's not like the other hip sort of thing. So I would say within a year, I was maybe 90% recovered, but even now, I'm not 100% recovered.
Mm-hmm. This was just something I thought about. You mentioned on the forum, correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the basic tests or one of the things that everybody, quote unquote, should be able to do is run a 10K at 15 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. I just wanted to quickly ask you about, generally speaking, which is always terrible because it's terrible to give general advice, but generally speaking, is that something that people should aspire to when they go about training? And I'm talking about the average athlete. Is that something that, well, I'll just let you explain on what you meant perhaps with that, with those 50 minutes, 10K.
Yeah, so I think what that came from was one of the biggest predictors of longevity and avoiding death, for lack of a better way to put it, is having a high VO2 max. So they do these various studies where they compare the VO2 max of older people with how long they live, and for athletes who are in the highest group of VO2 max, the risk of all cause mortality goes down by like 75%. It's a crazy big number. So VO2 max is a really important kind of metric, I guess, for those who want to live a long and functional life. And that particular sort of highest category for a lot of the studies lines up with a VO2 max of about 50 mils per kilo. And if we look at sort of regular economy numbers and we try and put that in some real world terms, a VO2 max of 50 mils per kilo is about a 50-minute 10K. So I think for those folks who probably don't have met carts in their basement, they can test their actual VO2 max. It's a good just general sort of rule of thumb benchmark for folks to aspire to.
Mm-hmm. How much of a high VO2 max is genetics versus training?
Yeah, so it seems like it's about 50-50 in the genetic studies, that look at twins and kind of compare how their VO2 max shifts just by virtue of being a twin versus when they train. It seems like it's about a 50-50 sort of breakdown. But I think in practice, the ability of most folks to improve their VO2 max from where they are, just because most folks are not living a very active life, that delta is much greater than what most people think. So when you're saying, well, my VO2 max is only 40 because I'm genetically predisposed to having a VO2 max of 40, that's a lot less likely than your VO2 max is 40 because you're not training enough. I think most people can get 60, 65, maybe even 70, even if they can't reach those, world-class levels of 80, 85 mils per kilo that most of the Olympians are at in the endurance sports.
I was just thinking of another question, but I'm blanking on it, so I'll just continue with one of the questions that somebody else asked. Nowadays, that measuring power on the run is possible, would you say it is important that power and heart rate zones match? And if so, how to make them match? Adjusting power to heart rate zones or the other way around?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's kind of tricky about the introduction of power is, at least in cycling, the initial zones that were being kind of touted for athletes with power meters didn't match up with the heart rate zones. So, Andy Coggan in his book Training and Racing with a Power Meter outlined these six or seven different zones. And if you look at what zone 1 and zone 2 mean for him, and then you compare it to like what Joe Friel meant for zone 1 and zone 2 in heart rate terms in his book, they're two different things. So I think that's one of the things that you really want to make sure of when you're comparing across power and heart rate zones, that you're talking about the same thing. And really, I guess what we're talking about there is when you say zone 1 for power, you want to get that from the same test that you're saying zone 1 for heart rate. So I'm a fan of these progressive tests where you do sort of 10 by 5 minute stages, and you identify the zones from that test based on where the thresholds occur. And you say, okay, where was my power at in zone 1? Where was my heart rate at in zone 1 for that test? And you make sure that those two things line up. So I think that's the first most important thing, to make sure that you're talking about the same thing with your power and heart rate zones. And then secondary to that, I think heart rate is really good as a long-term metric, and power is really good as a short-term metric. So what I mean by that is, if you're doing a long race like a marathon, and you maybe aren't quite sure what the conditions are going to be like on the day, and you're not maybe able to replicate those conditions exactly at home, heart rate provides a really good way of equalizing those things. So if you're training at 70 degrees and you're able to hold 140 beats a minute for one of your marathon specific sessions, but then you go to the race and it's 80 degrees, and you try and hold the pace that you held at 70 degrees, then you're in for some problems. So I think that's where heart rate is really useful, looking at the big picture. Power, on the other hand, is really useful in that it responds really quickly. So with heart rate, if I have a heart rate target at the start of the race in the first mile, and I go off and I try to hit that heart rate target, the power that I'm expressing early is going to be much greater than my average power for the race, because heart rate lags, and that can happen quite a bit during a race. Like on a hill, you're going up and you don't realize that you're going above your target effort until your heart rate kind of climbs well and truly after you're done with the hill. So I think power is really useful there as sort of a cap of keeping you honest and making sure that real time you're not going over your target output for the race.
Mm-hmm. I remembered what I was going to ask you. You were talking about the example of a 40 milliliter per kilo VO2 max person who probably is under training much more than genetically predisposed. One of the things, reading the forum, but also going deeper into the heart rate training, metabolic fitness, is how much time you should actually think about contributing. So at least from my amateur perspective, there's plenty of people who are health and fitness conscious. They'll spend 2, 3, 4 hours spinning, mostly again the anaerobic activity, the spinning, the CrossFit, whatever they might do in the gym mostly. But when I read through the stories on the Madcrew forum, there's people training 5, 10, 15, 20 hours on a weekly basis, amateurs, all kinds of people. So there is, when you were talking about people who are undertrained, I wanted to ask you about this mindset of how much time does it actually take? How much of an effort does it actually take to increase those, let's say, those VO2 max numbers? Because I think, at least this is how I thought about it, that say 2 hours a week would suffice. But then I read these stories on the forum. It's like, 2 hours a week is just warm up for many people. So I would like to ask your opinion about that as well.
Yeah, it was funny. One of the threads on the forum, I think Dennis posted, showed physical activity guidelines for children, and then how they changed for adults over the years. And for children, it was like your target physical activity should be 3 hours a day. I think it was, from recollection. And then for adults, it went down to 3 hours a week. So somewhere along the way, there's this recommendation that when you get older, you only need sort of a tenth of the volume that you do when you're a child. And I think someone made the comment that it was much more due to what we can get adults to do. What's kind of the baseline that we're looking to gradually move them up from, rather than really being representative of what people need to stay in shape through the years. So I think we do have a very tough sort of position that we're in as a society, where most folks just aren't moving very much at all. Just by the way society is set up. Certainly in the US, there's a lot of cities that really aren't very walk friendly, and they're not very bike friendly. And really they're set up so that everyone has a car and is doing their hour commute every day to the office, and then when they get to the office, they're sitting on their butt for 8 hours, 9 hours a day. And I think that's the current situation. So it's a big societal problem, but at the same time, I think there are certainly things that many of us can do that can substantially increase our movement without too much upheaval. I'm a big fan of the under-desk treadmills. I think everyone should have one of those, honestly, with the stand-up desks. That's a great way to, you can easily get 10, 15,000 steps a day just by doing that. So, I think it's just kind of shifting the perspective and being willing to be a little bit weird, being willing to do things that maybe your coworkers aren't doing, and kind of paving the way there and showing them what they could potentially be doing as well. But
because I guess that for many people, the assumption living that kind of life, or with that kind of amount of training, is they will go to the gym for 2 or 3 times a week, say, perform 45 minutes, 60-minute workout. But on a long term, it's probably I wouldn't say much better, but it's more interesting to have those 10, 15,000 steps, to have a daily zone 0, zone 1 activity, which almost seems too good to be true. But it's from what I've learned from you and other people, it's a far superior approach, also injury-wise and all that kind of stuff, but mostly metabolically speaking.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the metabolic aspect. I think what a lot of people do is a typical day for many Americans, at least, is you get up, you're in a frazzle, getting ready for work, you drive in your car to work, you're all stressed out because traffic here is horrible, and you kind of, when you sit down at your desk, your adrenaline, your cortisol's already elevated, and you're already kind of on edge, and then you have various stresses through the day at work, and then you get in your car at the end of the day and you go to the gym, and then you're all pumped up, and you think, well, I gotta put in a really hard workout here. So you do this really tough, high intensity workout, and then you get home and you're like, I can't sleep, I can't wind down, I'm all frazzled. So you get really poor sleep, and then you do the whole thing over again, 5 days a week. So I think, if anything, we need to completely flip that. And any time that you move, you want it to be calming. You want it to be switching that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and recovery system on. And that's something that I really encourage athletes who have that kind of lifestyle to do, is to learn what flips that switch for them. And, sometimes it's just kind of getting out for 15 minutes during the day, just get out to a park, and just walk around the park just make the commitment to do that anytime you feel a little bit frazzled and stressed. And it's amazing what kind of difference in your quality of life and your health and fitness those small changes can make.
Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, again, one of those questions, how does training differ between male and female athletes?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So I think there's two answers to this question. One of them is, how does training differ, and the other is, how should training differ? So my experience, and thinking again back to my time at the Institute of Sport, the first coach that I worked with there was very insistent that the females train quite differently to the males, and that females, because they're smaller and more typically smaller, and because their energy needs are lower, just because of their size primarily, they are able to handle higher intensities of training. So the female swimmers would be doing a lot of that kind of high zone 2, low zone 3 sort of, solid aerobic work, whereas the guys who were larger would be doing kind of the easier sort of zone 1 work, and I think he was right in the sense that the females could tolerate that, but it leads to some different adaptations. And I think ultimately what it leads to for the ladies who train like that is they have quite small engines in terms of their cardiac dimensions, and they're able to rev them at very high intensities. So when you train someone like that, they can hold high heart rates for very, very long periods of time. And, my perspective now is that even if they can do that, it's not super healthy to shoot for those adaptations. So these days, I'm much more a fan of, even for the females who might be able to handle more of that kind of moderate aerobic work, I still like to pay a lot of time towards trying to build the engine and build the size of their heart, and so that when they're doing a race effort, it's not holding 98% of their capacity for as long as they possibly can. It's holding 90% of their capacity, so that we're not really, we're not overstraining them quite as much as those kind of approaches do.
Switching a bit from training-related questions to AMA questions, what are your goals for 2025?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think my goal, in 2025 and really beyond that is building my capacity to explore more. So I've got this mantra of earn the epic, and I've done a lot of epic training over the years. I've done epic camp in New Zealand, where it was sort of 2 60-hour weeks of training that were back to back, just sort of exploring the entirety of the South Island. And but I don't think I've ever really, while doing that sort of training, I was always kind of thinking ahead to the next competitive goal, and I wasn't sort of looking around and enjoying where I was and taking it all in. And now, as I'm getting older, they're the things that I think back on. I think back on those memories of just being out there exploring and just seeing all of these amazing parts of the world. And so I want to do that again. I want to get back to the level of fitness that enables me to do that. And this time when I do it, I want to look around a little bit more.
Did you always want to work as a coach? And if for some reason you weren't a coach today, what job would you do?
Yeah, I think initially I wanted to be an athlete. So that was my first goal. And then when that sort of fell apart, I sort of started looking at why that fell apart, and then coaching became a very logical progression from that, because I was like, I have this knowledge now that I can maybe help other people from not falling apart, and that was certainly something that motivated me then, and still motivates me today. So I think that's still something that's very important to me. But if I wasn't doing that, I have always loved computers. So I think that's kind of my closet hobby is computer science, and looking at machine learning and reinforcement learning particularly. That's kind of my real passion. So if I wasn't coaching, I think I'd probably be pursuing that in some way, shape, or form.
Was there a specific moment where you noticed you weren't going to be an athlete? Like, was it some acute moment, or was it the accumulation of different bad feelings?
Yeah, no, it was a very acute moment. So I went to Sydney. I grew up in a small town in kind of the middle of Australia, and I went to Sydney for college. And the college that I was at, one of the swim programs that was very close was run by Doug Frost, who was the coach of Ian Thorpe, the top Australian guy. So I thought, well, I still want to see what I can do with the swimming thing. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna try and join that program. And I went down there and spoke with Doug, and we were going through my times and stuff. And he's like, I don't think this is going to work out for you, sort of thing. So yeah, that was a very acute moment. And at that point, I was kind of I think that was really the end of any hopes that I had of being the next Olympic champion, the next Ian Thorpe as a swimmer. And at that point, I guess I moved more into coaching.
What made you move to the US, and why Florida?
So there's two answers to this one as well. So the first one is first one's boring, and that is a girl initially made me move over here. But the second more interesting answer is health and fitness made me move over here. So one of the places that I was working in Australia was I was working as an aquatic manager at this gym, and the whole team went down to this conference in Sydney. And we saw this guy, Joe Cerulli, give a lecture. And he was a businessman who had moved from New York down to Gainesville, Florida, and had set up one of the biggest, most successful fitness centers in the country, Gainesville Health and Fitness. And when I listened to him speak, the passion that he had for health and fitness, and the passion that he had for making this community of Gainesville, Florida, healthy, and it's kind of an elderly community. There's a lot of older people there, so he has like a senior center, and he just really took this approach of really wanting to make this little community as healthy and fit as possible. And he really honestly inspired me. Like I left that talk that he gave with goosebumps, and so I thought, yeah, I really want to work for this guy. And that was what I did. Once I decided that I was moving to the States, I was like, I really want to get a job at this gym that this guy has. And it was a great decision. Honestly, it was one of the, most sort of, they placed a real emphasis on continuing education. So it was almost like a university sort of vibe. Everyone was really learning and wanting to get better, and it had a big impact on me, and still does to this day.
How old were you when you moved?
I think I was it, like 25, I think? Yeah.
What are your, if this is repetitive, you're free to skip the questions. Maybe we already answered it. But what are your most cherished experiences or memories as an athlete? Other than the acute moment where you become aware of not being able to
that
progress.
definitely wasn't cherished. No, that's it's a salient memory. I think about it a lot, but it's definitely not cherished. No, I think honestly it goes back to those training camps. So even more than any racing success that I had or whatever, I think just those experiences of being on training camps, you know, and point-to-point training camps where you're just spending your days exploring these beautiful parts of the world, that you know, that's something that still motivates me and still makes me want to get out there. You know, I think there's something very special about going places on a bike, you know, and as opposed to being in a car traveling from town to town. When you're on a bike, you smell everything, you hear everything, you know, it's a completely different experience. You're much more one with with nature and with the country. And, you know, it's really strange. Like, I still have very, very salient memories of particular places through the US that I've ridden a bike that I would never have those same memories if I'd driven those places. You know, it really sticks with you. So I think those are the things that I think about these days.
Quick off-topic question: how is the US in general for cycling? I'm European, obviously, so I'm quite familiar with the European roads. They can differ quite a bit between countries, especially here in Belgium, the Netherlands. They're great. In Italy, Spain, not that much. But we recently drove through Germany by bike, and it was all quite nice. But I have no idea about the US and how training, but even bikepacking or something like that, how easy it is to do that.
Yeah, I think it's probably similar to Europe as a whole. You know, there's some areas that are very good and some areas that are very bad. You know, I'm fortunate I live close to Boulder, Colorado, so, you know, half of the town are professional triathletes and cyclists. So the cycling around here is usually pretty good. But, you know, going back to Florida, there were certainly areas where it was a little sketchy. You know, you'd get sort of the pickup trucks on very narrow roads coming through, and you know, that wasn't so good. So I think one of the things that I really like about this sort of side of the country is there's a lot of gravel and a lot of trails and things like that. You know, so that's what I'm getting more into now, is just staying off the roads as much as I can, and sticking to the gravel and the trails, because I mean, you can go, you know, I could ride to Arizona on trails from here if I really wanted to. It's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. What was the job that tanked your fitness?
Yeah, so I was so the story goes on the forum. We were talking about some of the way, you know, our fitness has changed over the years, and my biggest, I guess, drop in fitness came when I took this particular job. And what I was doing, I co-founded a sports tech startup with this guy, and I was serving as the CTO, the technology officer. And you know, the thing about kind of startups in general is you really don't have a schedule, you know, so anytime any opportunity comes up, you sort of have to be willing to drop what you're doing and just go do it. So there's very much there's not a lot of predictability, and there's quite a time crunch just in terms of making progress quite quickly. You know, and I think anytime you're in a situation where you don't control your schedule, you don't control your fitness. You know, you have to be able to say, okay, I'm going to train at this time, and here's where I'm going to be, and here's what I'm going to do. If someone else controls that or influences that, then you're really swimming upstream. So yeah, that continued for a couple of years, and I was like, no, this can't, you know, this isn't going to a good place in terms of I'm getting older, and I want to be able to you know, increase my fitness. If anything, I certainly don't want to be, you know, don't want to be your typical stressed out, unfit, out of shape, yeah, guy. So,
Would you train Lionel Sanders? I don't know who asked, but it's a funny question.
Based on what I've seen from Lionel, I would say no. And like, first of all, I have to say I really respect Lonel, and I love watching his YouTubes, and I love how open he is. But I've worked with some different pro triathletes, you know, and I think you get a sense for their sort of personality, and the vibe I get from Lionel is that he's very independent minded, and almost independent-minded to the point that he will rebel against any advice given just so that he can say he's in control of this. I don't think that personality-wise he's the type of guy who would be like, let's team up and let's team up together and do this. You know, I think there would always be this sense of, well, coach wants me to do this, but I'm going to tweak this a little bit because I want to be in control, you know, and when you get that, it's almost better that the athlete doesn't have a coach, because if they're you know, chopping off their nose to spite their face sort of thing by just changing the program for the sake of saying that they're in control of the program. If they just build the whole thing themselves, then you know, I think they're generally more content, and they probably get to a place that's a better program for them.
There was this thing about in Niels van der Poel's How to Skate 10K. There was he wrote a little bit about his relationship with his coach as well, and how with his relationship not only with his coach but also his relationship with coaching, and where he mentioned that I hope I'm remembering it correctly, but that the athlete in the end is in control, but there has to be some kind of back and forth, and you can't just be, you know, changing everything just to be in control. But it's a delicate situation. I mean, it's not. Perhaps this is the reason why the question is quite funny, but there's a delicate relationship going on between the athlete and the coach, obviously.
Yeah, there. I mean, I think that the successful coaching relationships I've had with pro triathletes, it's always been a very, very tough mindset for the athlete, but they have to almost get to a point where they're like, I'm going all in on this, and I'm just going to see what happens, you know. And when you get an athlete, and I've worked with athletes who've had years and years of experience with like the best coaches in the world, you know, and they come to me kind of on the end of their athletic careers, and some of them are still have that beginner's mind where they're like, well, what you're saying sounds really interesting, I want to just give it a go. And those athletes, you know, it works out. I mean, it amazes me every time that they do that, because I'm like, surely you've got all these opinions and you've got all of these things that, you know, worked for you in the past. And, you know, we have some of those conversations, but I think ultimately for it to be successful, they have to reach that point where they're like, yeah, I've done all of that stuff before, but I want to try this and just see what it does for me. You know, and I think when they have that attitude going in, it generally works out pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Which athletes, pro or amateur, active or dead, inspire or influence you?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ones that we've talked about already, you know, like Mark Allen was, you know, Mark Allen's experience really inspired me a lot, just because he had a very similar sort of journey to what I had. You know, he grew up as a competitive swimmer and was in very intensive sorts of training, you know, where there was a lot of emphasis on sort of threshold work, and he took that into his triathlon career initially and had some success, but sort of reached this brick wall where he wasn't able to push through to you know, to the Kona World Championship. So he really had to reflect a lot, and you know, was fortunate to meet up with Phil Maffetone at that point, and Phil just completely flipped everything on its head and said, no, we're not going to be doing all of this high intensity work that you've been doing before. We're going to set this heart rate cap, and we're going to have patience, and we're going to spend the first part of the season just sticking to this heart rate cap and laying this base. We're going to change up your diet. You know, we're going to make sure that you've got a good amount of fat in the diet. You know, we're going to completely remake your whole metabolism. And, you know, it led to not only Mark's success as a triathlete. I mean, he won 6 world championships after that, but it also, I think, changed his relationship with the sport and made it much more healthy. You know, and he got very, I don't want to say esoteric, but he became very conscious of energy, you know, his own energy, the energy of the island and the places that he was racing. He got very much more in touch with himself as an athlete and with the environments that he raced at. So I think he he inspired me a lot. And then I think coaches, Arthur Lydiard inspired me a lot. I think his willingness to kind of try things that were different to what science said that he should have been doing, but he had skin in the game, and he trained himself and he tried a bunch of stuff on himself and kind of figured out what worked, and then was able to come up with systems that really enabled New Zealand to perform at levels that they shouldn't have been performing at, based on the size of the place. So I think he is somebody that I look up to a lot. And then from Australia, Percy Cerutty. So Percy was somebody who similarly himself had to remake himself as an athlete and a person. He was somebody who in his middle age was falling apart physically, like on the verge of death. And the doctors said, look, you're not going to make it much longer if you keep doing this. And so he completely changed what he was doing as a person, got in touch with nature, started hiking these big distances, and and eventually, through remaking himself and doing quite well as an amateur athlete, started to get some attention from some top athletes, and obviously trained some of those guys to the Olympic levels. So I think his story really inspires me as well, since I'm middle-aged now and on a similar path.
There was another question: how fit are Kona and Percy?
So Kona is my dog. She's a Shiba Inu, and Percy is my cat. And Kona what? I mean, they're both older now. They're sort of like me. They're reaching their older years, so they're probably not as fit as they once were. But Kona was very, very fit. She was my training partner for all of my runs, and most of the runs were a doggy fartlek, so they were kind of dictated by her pace. And she would throw in a sprint every so often, but often it turned into doggy hurdles, because she would throw in a sprint and then change direction, and I'd jump over her to avoid hitting the pavement. So yeah, but yeah, I think she's probably fitter than most dogs, I guess is the answer.
I've been running with my parents' whippet. It's one of the most discouraging things to do, because those dogs are so fast and they just look at you as if nothing's happening. They're running at, I don't know, 70 beats per minute, and you're kind of, you're dead, and they just look at you and one thing you were talking about Mark Allen, and I think we talked about it earlier as well. I think up to the point where he started training with Phil Maffetone, he had already participated in 5 or 6 Kona Ironman championships. So to be able to have that amount of conviction, then change everything up, go with a new coach, new approach, and then win another 6 Ironmans is kind of I didn't know that when I started listening to his story, that he had participated in so many Ironmans, and that he kind of made that switch after all this time is quite extraordinary. I'm not aware with the pro triathletes today, or the ones that I don't know too much about the sport, but that was quite impressive, mentally speaking, for anybody, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think even more so from the fact that he was one of the top short course athletes prior to that. So he'd had a lot of success in training the way that he was training, and just to be able to make that shift to say, I'm going to try something that is completely different to what I've done for all of my life. He was a swimmer when he was 11, 12 or whatever, and had trained that way all the way up to into his 20s, and just amazing. And I think that mindset again of being willing to just say, I'm going to give this a try and see what it does for me. It's a really powerful mental shift for those who are able to do that.
What are your lowest moments, both moments in time, like workout, races, and phases in life, and what were your productive and unproductive responses to them?
Yeah,
it's a broad question.
I think in terms of life, one of my lowest moments was when I gave up a swim coaching job that I really loved. So I was working as an age group coach in Sydney, and I had a great group of young swimmers, and swim coaching is a very tough gig, especially when you're doing it full time, because in order to work, like a full-time job, sort of 30 to 40 hours a week, you're working, I was getting up at 3 a.m. at that point in time. I was riding my bike to the pool, getting in there at 4 a.m., getting the pool ready, taking all the covers off, all of that good stuff for the first workouts at 5 a.m., and kind of doing the reverse of that in the evening, so you wouldn't get home until 8 p.m., 9 p.m., depending on if you got club nights as well. So it's a very, very tough lifestyle, but I loved it so much. I really, really enjoyed working with that sort of athlete, young developmental swimmers who had big goals, and they were really putting the sport first and foremost. But I just couldn't do it. In terms of your question on burnout, that's probably as burnt out as I've ever been in my life. I was exhausted and sick, and I just couldn't keep up with it anymore. So saying goodbye to that job was probably one of the last ones. And I'm in Sydney, and swim coaches don't make a lot, so I was broke as I couldn't afford anything. I could barely afford food, clothes, all the essentials. So it was a very, very rough time. If I hated my job, it would have been easier, but then it would have been just, who cares? We'll go on to something else, But I think when you really love what you're doing, but you realize that it's not good for your health and good for your long-term sanity, then that's always tough.
Final question from the AMA. I assume that the swim is your favorite part of the triathlon? What's your second favorite sport?
Yeah, I really love riding my bike. Still to this day, I love getting out on the trails on my bike. I think there's something just very therapeutic about being out on your own, whether it's a quiet road or quiet trails, and that kind of accomplishment of going from one place to a long way away, riding your bike to the next town or next state or whatever it might be, that there's something that really rings very, very true in my heart every time I do that. I'm like, oh man, this is great. This is what I'm put on this earth to do. So maybe even more than the swim. I mean, I love swimming, but swimming is kind of a love-hate thing. I love swimming if I've got an empty pool to myself and I'm just kind of in the meditative state of just kind of doing my set. But sometimes pools are busy and it's kind of hectic, and I think getting out on the trails on my bike is probably my favorite thing of all.
There was a question about your goals in 2025. Do you have athletic goals? A specific race or a specific goal you're working towards?
Yeah, I think the two things that I can see myself doing, maybe not 2025, but in the near term, I would like to be fit enough to do another Ironman. Just to do it, not for any particular competitive reason, but just to. I think that's a good measure of fitness. If you're fit enough to just get around an Ironman course, you're in good shape. Especially at my age. So that would be one. Sorry.
If the 10K at 50 minutes too hard, you can too hard a fitness goal. You can try get fit for an Ironman.
go along instead. Yeah. So there's that one, and then I think swimming as well. Like I feel like I'm built to swim, so I feel like I kind of have unfinished business there. So I could see myself jumping in a few masters competitions or something like that, and seeing what I can do there.
So I will ask you if you have any closing thoughts, but one of the reasons why perhaps, or I think one of the reasons why we didn't go into all these kind of terms that get thrown around, like VO2 marks. We talked about threshold settings, sessions. I tried not to talk too much about them in this conversation because the forum is actually full with those conversations already. They're much more nuanced than we could do here, or at least that we in this format could do. So if people have more questions about that or want to get up to speed or just learn a lot like I'm doing, the forum is actually great for that. I mean, I could ask you about the best ways to measure heart rate, but there's just so much conversation on the forum already, which is a better place. Perhaps, Alan, we could close on just some thoughts that you have. Is there something that you would like to say, or that we should close on? It's an open question to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've hit on a lot of good stuff, and I really appreciate you taking the time to put this together. I think these kind of conversations are one of the reasons that I got the forum together, just to meet people like yourself and to be able to just chat through this stuff. You can probably tell I'm still pretty passionate about all of it, and I'm just hoping for more of that in the future, that we can get a really good group of people together, and we can keep these conversations rolling, because I think I think health and fitness is so important through the lifespan, and I would love nothing more than if I'm sitting down as an 80-year-old on the forum still, and we're still having these conversations with each other. I think that would be really cool.
All right. I'll make sure to put a link to the forum and also your Twitter and other links that are relevant. But thank you very much for doing this. And who knows, perhaps we can have another session in the future if some questions remain unanswered. We'll see.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kobe.